Hello, everyone, and welcome to another Directions Mag Geospatial webinar. Today, sponsored by our friends at Esri. I'm Barbary Duke, Editor-in-Chief here at Directions Mag, joined by our senior webinar producer, Lynette Qualia. We encourage you to read the latest geospatial news, exclusive articles, listen to podcasts, and of course, catch up on all those webinars that you missed over at directionsmag.com. We are excited to have Jay and Mary with us today. Welcome, team. We're excited to learn how we can improve our GIS data quality control. They've got some great demos as well as tips to help your workflow in your organization. Welcome.
All right. Hey, everyone. Jay Carey, and with me today is Mary Muzingo. And
Yes.
we're both folks from Esri here in Redlands. And we're going to take a few minutes, a little bit of time to talk about data quality control. And we're going to talk specifically about Data Reviewer. All right, so in today's presentation, we're going to first cover the importance of data quality. And we're going to look at it from both a organizational perspective, but also from a technical perspective as well. We'll then talk about the different data quality management capabilities that are available in ArcGIS. But then we're going to dig down specifically into what is ArcGIS Data Reviewer. We'll talk about the different workflows that are available to both automate quality control workflows, but also for workflows, quality requirements that cannot be automated. We'll talk about how Reviewer can help facilitate other forms of review as well. We're also going to talk about how we manage errors and through a life cycle, once they've been discovered, how we can use those errors to expedite corrective workflows and make sure other stakeholders in the organization understand the liabilities in your data. At the end, we'll wrap up with some summary of the workshop, as well as provide you some resources that you can use to kind of get up and running and learn more about the extension. So before we kind of move forward talking about data quality tools, we really kind of need to think about what a data quality means to an organization, and specifically different folks in the organization. So for executive leadership, good data quality means just reducing risk and decision making. Right? If you're using GIS data to make decisions or help make decisions, poor quality data can introduce risk. That risk could be either financial risk or organizational confidence in how the organization works. For managers, especially those folks who are managers of geospatial data, good quality data means they're doing their job, that they are things are being done that allow them to better leverage the technology in the organization, which might increase utilization across the organization. It means also decrease operational costs because you're finding errors, you're fixing areas, so folks who are managing data for you can use that time to do more high value work, such as doing analysis or modeling. And ultimately for knowledge workers, those folks who rely on GIS products and services, having good quality data at their fingertips allows them to kind of get their job done more efficiently and makes their job easier in a lot of cases. So once you kind of think about how data quality might impact those different folks in your organization, we really need to also think about what good quality data means to the organization as well. So each organization has different quality requirements, and they're going to vary based on the purpose and use of the data they're leveraging. As defined by the International Organization for Standardization, or ISO, GIS data has lots of different components to its quality. For example, spatial or positional accuracy is a measure of a feature's location in relation to its true position on the Earth. Data completeness is defined as the presence or absence of features. So collectively, these different elements provide insight into how well data represents features in the real world. So before we continue, let's think about some of these questions and how you might answer them. And let's take a moment to answer our first poll. So ArcGIS already has a whole host of capabilities in it that help you create and manage good quality data. There are a whole series of capabilities that help you increase data integrity in attribution, feature attribution. So for example, being able to prevent attribute values in a feature that aren't within a defined range or list of valid values. There are quality control capabilities that detect errors between spatial relationships and between features using things like topology rules or validation attribute rules that can be used to be created to validate features as well. And there's a whole host of quality assurance capabilities that support long data transactions and reconciliation workflows when working in multi-user environments. There also are integrated quality control capabilities that are built into complex data types like parcel fabrics and utility networks, where rules are available to also assess those features as well. So collectively, these capabilities enable the creation and really good management of data. When extended using Data Reviewer, you can implement some control workflows that meet the most stringent requirements of your industry. So Reviewer is an extension to ArcGIS, both ArcGIS Desktop, including Pro, and ArcGIS Enterprise. And what it provides is a set of capabilities to help you automate and standardize how you do quality control workflows. It helps save money because a lot of the things that folks do with Reviewer is to automate quality requirements, so they don't have to spend time having folks looking at data, visually interrogating it, or creating custom tools to do that kind of work. Reviewer is used by lots of different folks in different size organizations. So large organizations use Reviewer because they want to have consistency across different production units that might be in different parts of the world. Small organizations like Reviewer because they can automate because they may be resource constrained and they don't have as many resources as they have for a mission to get their work done. So in our first demonstration, Mary's going to be showing you how to increase quality assurance in feature attribution using capabilities that I just talked about in ArcGIS. Mary?
Thanks, Jay. So the first part we're going to talk on data integrity really starts at the database level. Attribute domains are a great way to limit the available values, making sure that only particular values are going to be used as attribution for feature classes as well as tables. And we'll play into this in a further demonstration, looking at a data reviewer ready to use domain check rule. But first and foremost, let me kind of tie all this together. I really want to show you, there we go, how to set and even update valid field domain values. There we go. So I'm looking at my features here, and I've got a couple of these points, right? I have site addresses within my buildings. And if I look at the attributes for those here, I'll notice, oh, I've got three. I've got different suites, right? A, B, and C that are all selected here. And typically, I also associate a location type with this. Well, yes, it's in a building, but really I want to say that this is like an office or a type of suite. So I want to add to this domain value. Notice that this constrains what I can choose, and I'm not able to actually type in a value and say office, right? When I click O to type in office, it just switches to other. So let's look at updating the domain values. I'm going to look at the site addresses. And I want to show you a little bit about how the field for site location is defined. And right here, it's telling me that it's using a domain, the site address location domain. So again, I'm going to go into our data design for that layer and now go to the domains. So I can see that the site address location domain here has all of these available values to choose from. But really what I want to add is one for, there we go, office or a suite. And I'm going to use that also in my description here. So it's just a matter of adding that value, typing it here with a code and then a good description for it. And saving it. So once I've applied the change to the domain, and domains are at a database level, which means any other feature classes that are in that database that use this domain now have this as an available value. So I can select these three features again and notice that that location now has office or suite available. And I'm just going to save myself a little bit of time, select all three at once, update that location, apply those changes. And now as I click on each of them, I'll see those have been updated. So a little later on, when we talk about automated validation, I'm going to go and look at adding even more data quality checks to my database and even be able to incorporate a check to look for appropriate domain values. So here we sort of checked off our first list of demos here. You can see that we're starting at the database level, just working with domains, and then we're going to go into Data Reviewer, talk a little bit more about ready to use roles, all the way down to reviewing our data and even reporting on data quality. And throughout the demonstration and this webinar, we want to make sure there's a chance to ask questions as they come up while you're listening to them. So any questions so far on what you've seen in the demonstration or just in this first part of defining data quality?
So it looks like we got a question early on. So Data Reviewer is an extension. So how much more does it cost? That's a common question. A lot of folks are, as an extension, there is an additional cost to it. But what you typically want to do is talk with your account manager and find out if you may actually already have it. A lot of times folks actually have Data Reviewer as a part of their enterprise agreement. And I can't tell you the number of times I've had folks ask about it. We've talked to their account manager and they say, oh, they already have it. So definitely check with your account team to see if you already have it. And if not, they can help you out with the cost of adding that to your program. We have another question for the domain field. Did you see that one, Mary? Is there a way to load large data sets in grade, like a certain number, a list of maybe thousands into a domain?
Oh yeah, that's actually a really good question. So there is a way to do that. It just needs to be formatted in the right way. So you can do that with like a comma delineated set of codes and attributes.
Cool. Let's see here. Oh, we had a question here about whether there's a server side for Data Reviewer. That's a great question. There is. So Data Reviewer is also an extension to ArcGIS Enterprise. And currently what it is, it allows you to, in the pro-based workflows, it allows you to do, and we'll cover this a little bit later, is a lot of the validations and work that Mary's going to be showing later actually can be executed through Enterprise using web-based GIS services. So there isn't a server extension as well. And I think we're going to get into, I had another question about version data. We'll get to that as well, working with the different geodatabase types and the versioning that's supported as well. We'll cover that in a later section. Any other questions you want to cover there, Mary?
Yeah, I think we got all of them so far. So keep an eye on that as we go through.
Alrighty, great. Thank you so much for the questions. And yeah, definitely feel free to keep asking them. We're going to take stops along the way to answer questions as they come in. Alrighty, so in this section, we're going to cover automated review. Automated review is kind of one of the areas that most customers use Data Reviewer to support. This is the ability to use the computer to do the heavy lifting when it comes to assessing quality of data. It's organizations like it because it's fast, it's a computer doing the work. It's also consistent. That is to say, if you have a set of requirements built into your system, the answers that you get out of it will be the same today, tomorrow, the day after. So it doesn't have any subjectivity in it, as opposed to other workflows. Because it is an automated process, some folks use that to assess data, large sets of data at once, and kind of get a baseline understanding of how good or bad data is. There's a couple different workflows that automated review can be introduced into. Typically, automated review is used to assess data that's already exists in your GIS. Let's say you have a set of data of unknown quality, and you want to assess it as to whether it meets or doesn't meet your quality requirements. In ArcGIS Pro workflows, though, we have the ability to now interrogate data quality during creation. So during editing or modification of a feature, creation or modification of a feature, you can now assess that feature's quality before it gets inserted into the geodatabase. And you can prevent poor quality data from being created in the first place. So Data Reviewer has a whole host of review methods that assess different aspects of a feature's quality. This can include a series of capabilities that look at the attribution of a feature. For example, finding features that have null attribute values or invalid combinations of attribute values. There are a series of checks that look at a feature's integrity, finding out if it's actually contains, say, null geometries in the feature, or whether it's too large of a size or too small of a size, given our needs. And finally, there's a whole host of validation checks that look at spatial relationships between features. Simple things like finding features that overlap one another, or finding gaps between features, either gaps created between two features or more than two features. So a lot of folks have typical workflows for implementing really any kind of quality requirement. Is first, what are your requirements? This is a lot of times the longest pole in the tent. This is sometimes the most challenging part of implementing quality control workflows is, what are your requirements? You know, a lot of folks have different standards based on their industries. They may be delivering data to an organization where they already have a specification they have to build to. A lot of organizations leverage subject matter experts, folks who understand the data and what's good and what's not good about it, and how they're going to use that data in their analysis. A lot of folks use training and experience. They may have used some data in the past and they understand what didn't go well in the past, and they build quality control workflows to sort of vet that out, make sure it doesn't happen again. A lot of organizations will take that information and create what's called a quality assurance plan. This is a document. It's a living document that many organizations build to kind of document what good quality data means to the organization. It also serves as sort of a rallying point, especially when you have lots of different consumers in your organization or customers who consume your data, and there's not a common agreement about what constitutes good quality. Next step is then map those requirements into a capability in ArcGIS. So we've already talked about a lot of the built-in capabilities of the geodatabase. If those work, we have lots of folks who use really a best-of-breed approach. When it comes to using Reviewer, we have a thing called the Reviewer Checks poster. That's kind of a visual guide to the different validation checks that you can automate. And then finally, what is the workflow that I want to inject this quality control process into? Do I want to constrain my editors and prevent them from creating poor quality data? Or do I want to just allow the feature to be created, but I want to have a step in a workflow to validate that feature to determine if it's good or not? So constraint workflows are fairly straightforward. They're automatically triggered during an edit. This might be an edit in ArcGIS Pro. It could be an edit from a web application going through a service. When a rule is violated during a triggering event, it's going to throw an error. Here in the example, how it's surfaced in ArcGIS Pro, where it's displayed to the user, telling them what rule was broken and what the feature that broke it was. And a similar kind of workflow is when you're working with web applications or working through services, an error will come back, alerting the user that the feature wasn't created or updated. Validation workflows, on the other hand, are user initiated. They are triggered either interactively, in this example using ArcGIS Pro and the error inspector, where an editor decides, okay, I need to validate my features, and they'll use Error Inspector to trigger that validation. Alternatively, you could say, look, I want to just automate this process, so I might use a geoprocessing tool to validate features either in an ad hoc way, or I might schedule that to run automatically for me using the scheduler. If I'm a user of ArcGIS Workflow Manager extension, they have a quality control step in their latest release of Workflow Manager. It allows you to build it in as a step in a larger workflow where it's completely hands-off and runs automatically for you. And if you're developing custom web applications or working in a services environment, there's a REST endpoint that is exposed for you to be able to trigger that validation. You can specify different mechanisms for it. You can say, look, I just want to validate certain features within an extent. I want to validate maybe just a selected set of features, the full database, or in a branch versioned environment, I want to just validate the features that I've modified in my named version. I don't want to validate everything, just those features that I've changed in my version. All right, so in our next demonstration, Mary's going to be implementing some automated some automated validation rules using the ready-to-use rules. Mary?
Yeah. Thanks, Jay. So now that you've heard more about validation and constraint ready-to-use rules, I want to show those and how you can actually author or implement them within your database. To keep me on track here, we've already added a new valid domain value, and we're going to implement validation and constraint ready-to-use rules that are part of Data Reviewer. So first is we have address data that I'm working with, and we want to make sure that every time we add a building, we also have an address point that falls within it. So we're going to set that up as a validation rule. And then next, it'll be both a constraint and validation rule for our street center lines. So here we are back in ArcGIS Pro, and I want to make sure to implement all of those types of rules. And I think I saw a question that actually came up in the chat, so thanks for submitting that. Someone said, I want to ask about attribute rules and how to create my own attribute rules. Well, here's your demo. First things first, I was talking about looking for a couple buildings, which on visual inspection, I can already see this is going to be a little bit of an issue. I've got a new subdivision of data that I've added, right? And I want to make sure that everything looks great. Buildings, address points, and my street center lines. So I'm going to go to the layer that I'm working with. Here it's going to be building. And it's just a part of the data design. So I'm doing this, and it can be part of either a file database or also anything that's related to branched feature services. So this works for both. And I'm going to go down to attribute roles. So it's just the layer, data design, and attribute roles. So you'll see everything in Pro, it's got this great context. So we're now looking at the appropriate ribbon and tab based on setting up these attribute roles. There are calculation rules, and we're going to concentrate on a validation rule. So something that we run to ensure that we have everything looking good for our buildings and making sure they have address points in them. So we can look at these ready-to-use rules. You'll notice they're categorized by what's available on constraint and validation, and it's associated with the type of feature that I have. So right now my polygon building feature class allows me to set up these types of rules. I'm interested in looking for site address points and ensuring that each building has at least one in there. So this is going to be a check for comparing features or feature on feature validation. Well, this already comes up and it's associated with the building feature class, and that's the first input. I don't need to set it for any type of subtype, so I can leave that empty and it's going to run it for all of the features within that feature class. But I want to compare it to my site address points. And what I'm trying to define as part of this attribute rule is the error condition. Sometimes I have to think to myself, oh, I want to make sure that we have points in the polygon. And what we're defining here is the error condition, where we do not have, or we invert that relationship, a point that intersects that polygon. So let me give it a nice name here real quick. So this is actually missing address point in building. That's a nice name for it, and a description is that you need to add the missing address point inside of the building. Now, not only are we defining this error condition, we want to rank it or give a level of severity. So 1 would be critical, something that absolutely stops us from having the best quality data, and we want to make sure that we correct those things first. So these missing address points, I think I'm going to make that a 1 because it does actually affect a lot of things. And I'm going to do a couple tags here for what is involved, like building. Press tab here and then address point. All right, so this is the name of the role, the description, and everything defined with it. And now I can just save it. It saves it and it's associated with this feature class. So this is attribute rules related to my buildings feature class. Next, we were actually going to look for, I'll close that, cutbacks. So these sharp angles related to any of my road center lines. So I'm just going to click on one of these road layers, local streets. Again, go to data design and then down to attribute rules. So the same idea, we can set up a validation rule, and you'll notice on these ready to use rules, and it's defining it for every feature in road center lines, even though I'm sort of looking at a layer that's got a definition query only showing me local streets. This is something for all road center lines. And the ready to use rules available for validation that we have here, one of them is cutbacks. And we can do this for lines as well as polygons. So these are those sharp angles. If any of you have sat there digitizing on screen for long amounts of time, a slip of a mouse can create these jagged or very acute and sharp angles. So we want to make sure that we find those because they're really hard to see sometimes, but really easy to find with an automated rule, ready to use rule. So I'm going to do this actually for all of my features, not just local streets, but everything in road center lines. I'm going to do an angle about 20 degrees. I'm going to say this is a road center line cutbacks rule. And my description is that we have a necessary cutbacks in road center lines. This is nice to fix, but it's not going to affect anything too critical. So I think I might make this about a 3. And again, I'm going to put in type of a tag to remind me what this is related to. Okay, just a quick save. So that's set up for validation. Remember, those are going to check and run on features that exist. But what if I'm digitizing and I want to ensure that I don't introduce any of those cutbacks? Well, we'll put it as a constraint rule then. Same inputs, right? The angle here is going to be 20. And we'll get to decide when I'm inserting or creating a new feature, I want to run this check automatically. That's what triggers that validation to run, as well as updating the geometry of any features. So I'm going to call this road center lines. I might call it editing cutbacks rule. We'll take from that and borrow a little bit. Road center lines editing, and maybe we'll say insert or update. And again, with a couple nice tags here on what this is all about. All right. So I've saved both of these now as a constraint rule, a validation rule, and as well making sure that we have site addresses that always fall within a building polygon. All right. Let me get back and make sure. Oh, one more that I wanted to add because we were talking about it, right? I added something for site addresses in the domain value. So let's go to an attribute rule, make sure we're using a good ready to use rule and check those domains, right? So we can choose what attributes to ignore, but notice it's actually showing us everything that has a domain associated with those fields, right? So this is going to be address domain rule. Same here. And probably want to really check on that. So address point domain. Let's save that as well. So tying into the first demo and showing you, not only did I define it so I don't enter in incomplete or wrong information, but now also checking those fields. So let me go back here. Yes, we can check those off. We have now actually defined some of these ready-to-use rules, both for validation and for constraints. So for domains, but also finding buildings, building polygons without address points within them, as well as any of those sharp angles or cutbacks on our center lines when we're adding them, right, or updating them with constraint, as well as for all of the existing features with validation. Okay, let's go back and run these and see where everything stands. This is the exciting part, obviously. Okay. Everything looks good here. This is the area that I want to run all of these checks in. And first things first is associated with attribute rules in the database, we always have these validation feature classes that are created automatically. I just need to add them. So I can add error layers on any of these that have some type of validation set up with them. So add error layers. I only need to do that once. And then as I have those added, I can get to the error inspector. And this is where everything really starts to come back to us and we get that feedback. So I can choose what rules to evaluate by. We only have validation rules. And I think I'm just going to do it here in that new subdivision within that visible extent. So let's click to evaluate rules and see what's going on. Oh, that's what I don't want to see when things light up red, but that gives us more to talk about for sure. So it looks like I've got a domain that has an issue with it. We have a cutback, it looks like on West Court here, and all of those polygons that didn't have address points are all lit up here. So I can see all of these. And notice that severity comes into play. So I know I probably want to make sure I add those missing address points first. So as we're moving through this sort of data review or QC cycle, now that we have everything defined in the database, we're actually finding these issues. So review is currently taking place. And a little bit later on, I'll show you what the rest of that cycle looks like as we make some corrections, and then we can reevaluate these rules. All right. Great. Well, that is this quick demonstration on setting up some ready-to-use attribute rules. I caught one question that I tried to address during the demonstration. Let's look at some of those other questions and see if I can give an answer. And I did want to say on an earlier demonstration, someone asked about how to enter in like a list of domains. There's a great data management toolbox with a domains toolset. So I'd look at those geoprocessing tools, right? And that will allow you to even take information in a table and add it to a domain. Let's look at some of these other questions. Boy, lots of them rolled in. Okay.
So a good question came in about the attribute rules having access. Let me see here. So yeah, attribute rules actually are it was a question about, does everyone have access to attribute rules? And the answer is yes. Attribute rules are a core capability that are available with a standard ArcGIS license. The difference here, the experience, what we've done with reviewers, we've integrated the ability to configure checks within that workflow. So folks who have access, who use attribute rules without a reviewer license, for many rule types, have to write custom code using Arcade to either implement a calculation rule to calculate field values, or a constraint rule like Mary demonstrated. You'd have to write your own, or get copies of scripts that folks have shared. So that's one of the major differences.
And I did see another question someone was asking about how to share validation rules with multiple editors. Well, these validation rules, these ready-to-use attribute rules, can be set up both in a file geodatabase, but also associated with branch feature services. So if you are in a multi-editor environment, you're likely using branched feature services. And these rules being defined on the feature classes within the database itself means they're automatically shared. If anyone adds that layer to ArcGIS Pro, they'll have those validation rules already defined, and then they can just add the error layers and evaluate all of those rules.
Cool. Up here. Let's see here. So there was a question about, yeah, I guess this kind of gets to it, about whether rules apply to all versions of the data or only the current version. So as Mary mentioned, that they're stored in the geodatabase, they apply to all of the features, whether it's in the default version or a named version. So it percolates throughout. Those are great questions. I think another thing, I guess, on just to follow up on the sharing of rules, there are tools for exporting attribute rules, and those are exported out to a comma separated value file. So if you needed to share them, like send them to someone, you could do it that way, or you could actually send them the, an empty geodatabase with those rules already built into it. So a couple different ways of sharing attribute rules. We also had a question about sort of workflows for migrating from ArcMap to attribute rules. And one of the things the team did for the latest release of ArcGIS 3.0 was to build a tool in Pro that allows you to convert a data reviewer batch job, which is in the ArcMap world, reviewer uses a thing called a reviewer batch job to store validation rules. And a lot of folks have used those for a number of years. They can contain hundreds of data validation checks configured against their data. So at the 3.0 release, we built a tool that allows you to convert that batch job into a series of comma separated value list tables that can be imported as attribute validation rules. So if you check out the latest version of Pro 3.0, that tool is available to help you kind of make that transition more quickly. All right, great questions. Let's go ahead and we'll move on to the next section. Keep them coming, they're great. All right, so in our next section, we're going to talk about a different quality control workflow that a lot of folks implement because sometimes not all data can be assessed in an automated way. There are some what we refer to as semi-automated review, and these are really workflows that are guiding workflows that guide people. There are some situations where a configured check can't find a poor quality feature. So it might be, say, a missing feature. In most cases, automated checks work against existing features. So if you have a missing feature, sometimes those are tough to detect with an automated process. You might have features that are misplaced or miscoded, but not in a way that throws off an error with an automated check. Semi-review is subjective because you have people involved in the process of looking at data to determine if it's good or bad. Because it is a labor-intensive process, some organizations use some form of sampling to reduce that number of features to validate, although we do have folks in life safety areas where they actually do 100% review, visual review, for example, of their data. So talking about visual review, that is the most widely used form of semi-automated review. Visual review is just a general inspection of data and comparing your data in GIS against some other authoritative data source. Maybe it could be updated imagery, it could be blue line drawings coming in from the construction site. You have folks who are visually comparing the two, making a judgment call as to whether it's good or bad data, and then somehow marking it up as a change or an error. So in our next demonstration, Mary's going to be conducting a visual review of the new features that were brought in for that subdivision area. Mary?
Great, thanks, Jay. So as I go through and assess the data quality using a visual review, I want to keep in mind what data I've looked at and try and keep track of it. A long time ago, it used to be that, let me see here, sorry, there we go. I would do visual review, or someone would provide me with a print or a plotted set of features. And I would actually look at a paper and sort of flip up and down and compare it, right, to source imagery. Well, here we can do this obviously as much as possible. We'd like to all do this with our heads up sort of visual review. So on screen, I can look compared to maybe the latest world imagery layer, or maybe I've got my own aerial imagery that we've flown, and compare the features that I have extracted or created associated with the new subdivision and compare it to the imagery. Now, I created for myself a nice QC grid to kind of keep track of this. I'm going to turn that on. Let me show you what this sort of looks like. I'll zoom out to layers. So within my new subdivision, I have all these different polygon features that have been created. And it allows me to systematically kind of go through one at a time and visually review and make sure that there are no missing features, right? That all buildings have been collected. All right, so let me show you what that looks like, and another nice data reviewer tool that'll help us along the way. I'm just going to select all of these features. There we go, selection, select all. And then I'm going to go to managing quality and use the semi-automated review tool to browse features. So this allows us to take a selected set of features and then visit them one at a time, one by one. I'm going to bring up the browse features dialog here, and notice it shows me my first cell, A1. So let's zoom to that a little bit closer in. There we go. Give ourselves a little bit of context. I do see a few buildings. Oh man, I don't know if this is actually ready for review in that cell. I'm going to leave that for now. I'll come back to it, but I want to show I can just move to the next one and the next one. I see building polygons drawn over top of buildings. That's great. Those have all been collected. There's nothing here. Well, there's this one that straddles. So the nice part about this as well, as we're kind of moving along cell by cell, sometimes heard it referred to as mowing the lawn, so to speak. I can see all of those features that are selected. Oh, sorry about that. Trying to get that to go away. So then I can actually view my attributes. Let's go over here to attributes. So 1 and 2 I need to come back to, but cells 3 and 4 I can change the symbology here. So I've got all of this showing up, and if I zoom out, you can actually see, apply that I've changed what has a visual QC that's complete and some other things that are still left to be reviewed or that I need to come back to. So a nice way of going through and checking each of these and making sure that I go through the entire area. I can take a break for a meeting, come back from lunch, and know exactly where to start my review back up at. I feel like that Browse Features tool is something that I use not just for visual review, but I'll select a set of features so that I can visit them one at a time. It zooms to it. It shows the selected attributes as well. Okay. I think that just about rounds out what I was wanting to demonstrate with visual review. Don't forget your visual review. I guess that's the one thing that I'd like to leave you with. I'm always asked about how to do automated rules because it covers 100% of the data. So important. And once those are defined, sort of hands off, right? But there are things that we catch with our eye, missing features that have yet to be collected or extracted. Our eyes, our brains process things and see where a feature is actually off or not in the right location very quickly. So we can't get away from visual review, and we definitely don't want to miss out on all of those things that we can catch. Let me take a look at some of these questions and see what we have, if anything, related to what I just showed on visual review. And I think someone was asking about the error file and how that gets stored. So good question. I think that what you're getting at there is, how did I actually get that list of errors in the error inspector? It comes from the point, line, and polygon error feature classes that are created as soon as I've actually defined some validation rules and evaluated them. So they are automatically a part of the, excuse me, the same geodatabase, right? So they're stored in the same location as your feature classes. And I like somebody says, this is great. They find the majority of their errors after they've printed the map every time. Yep, always. Oh, is it time for another poll question?
Yeah. Wow. That's looks like a lot of folks, their workflows include some form of, majority case here where they have to have folks involved looking at data. Yeah. Yeah, definitely a process that has to be, sort of, managed. It's people time. That's a little more expensive than the computer time when it comes to validating features. So yeah, it's an expensive thing to have to do, and it kind of seen a lot of best practices with organizations where they automate as much as possible and then really just try to focus on the things where they need folks to look at stuff to a smaller case. And again, some organizations do use random sampling or some form of sampling to sort of get a representative sample to go back and review. So they don't review all the time, everything. Great. Thanks for the feedback. All right, so let's move on to the next section. Let's see. All right, so we've gone through a bunch of processes of showing, finding errors in different ways, and Mary's been showing, finding errors with automated checks, finding errors in data using visual review workflows. How do we use that information? What kind of questions can we answer? So a lot of common questions are from customers is, are the errors I'm finding specific to a geographic extent? Maybe there are certain parts of my data set, or maybe that are lower quality than others. Maybe it's because the original sources are different. How severe are the issues in my data? So Mary showed a little bit about the severity property of a validation attribute rule, where you can mark, not all errors are the same importance, and you can discriminate there. So how many, different types of issues in my data? So you may find systematic errors in data that might not take a whole lot of person power to sort of fix, whereas other types of errors might take more time to fix, right? So you can kind of start looking at the types of errors you find to do some workload balancing, for example, to figure out who's best able to fix that error. And looking at errors by source, again, not all data sets have the same quality level. They may not have been created the same way. You might be interested in looking at like how errors compare in certain data sets, because maybe those came from different production sites, maybe different sources that you might want to have a harder look at in the future. And most importantly, how many errors do I have in the data? How important are they? And what's my progress on getting them cleaned up, right? I think about data quality as a journey, not a destination. There's always going to be changes in business requirements as more and more workflows are implemented using GIS technologies. So, that's potentially always going to change. You're always going to be looking for different ways to improve quality. So errors, as we looked at in our earlier demo, they're stored in your geodatabase, right? They contain both spatial information and error geometry, but also non-spatial information, metadata that describes that error. Those are shown here in the error inspector, and as Mary mentioned, they are coming out of those system tables that are automatically created when you're using validation attribute rules. For data reviewer users, when you create errors using reviewers checks, we have a defined lifecycle that manages that data from basically cradle to grave. So it's a pretty simple process. It's really a three-phase life cycle. The first phase, when errors are first created, they're in the review phase. They've been detected, they've been found, but they're waiting for assessment and correction. In the correction phase, whether it's you or someone on your team or even a contractor outside your organization, they go through, assess the error. Is it an exception to the rule, or is it actually an error that needs to be fixed? And the last step in the workflow is to verify. Now, not all organizations have the verification step, but oftentimes you'll have someone else in the organization who reviews the work of others. In the verification step, someone reviews those corrections to make sure that they're good. And more importantly, they didn't introduce other errors in the data as a byproduct of that edit. Of course, this life cycle, and if there are errors, features go back to the review phase and they're done again. So it basically covers essentially from cradle to grave tracking of those, and it allows you to be able to report that progress on your work. So different ways of consuming those error results. We've already looked at them in ArcGIS Pro using the error inspector. You can also use things like feature symbolization to symbolize features by their validation status. That is to say, are they a good feature or are they a bad feature? You can build custom reports and charts. In this case, I'm charting out, showing a chart on my feature class saying how many features are good, that is to say they've been validated and they have no errors, which features are poor quality because they've been validated and they've found to have an error, and then the third category, which is unknown. Those features haven't been validated yet, so we don't really know yet. Lots of customers have used dashboards to communicate data quality in the summarized ways to other audiences like senior leadership. If this is a measure of merit for an organization, you want to highlight the progress the team's had, you can use a ArcGIS dashboard to provide that summary information. And finally, you can use things like ArcGIS API for Python to process and automate the generation of data quality reports. And we'll show some of that in a bit. All right, so in our next demonstration, Mary's going to go through and use and assess the errors she found during her review of data. And she's going to create a report to help inform her leadership about how things are going. Mary?
Here we are back in ArcGIS Pro. Remember, we have validated or evaluated the rules that we've defined, and we did find a couple issues. It's only showing me things that fall in my map extent. And actually, it's nice to also see the status. So we can see that this is reviewed, right? And what phase in our QC lifecycle we're at. So I wanted to show you what happens as we kind of go through this process. So I am told that there are issues with the data. I open it up. I see what's related to that in the Area Inspector on features that I've added. And I go, it says that there's a cutback there. So let me just decide to select the feature. I'm going to do this really quickly. And let's just keep this one selected. And it's telling me already, if you're going to edit it, you've got to cut back. So it's working on both directions here. So only select that one, go to edit. Let's look at these vertices. I've got, there it is. Really hard to see visually. I think I'm just going to delete one of those vertices. And now evaluate again, and it's acceptable. Of course, I have a few other things there. If I want to summarize what we're seeing here, there's a great article that included this data reviewer attribute rules reporting. I just tell it the database. It creates an Excel spreadsheet and actually gives me some great feedback. So we would call this QC report. I'll save my edits and then run this. I know we're getting close on time, so I'll show this really quickly as it completes. And make sure to show you this resource as well as others related to Data Reviewer. Okay. So here I am. I can see my QC report. I'm just going to open that up real quickly in Excel. There we go. Obviously, I need to define a lot more rules, but I get some great information here, right? The percent of features that have been validated versus not, right? So I only ran this on a small extent, but it shows me how many features were validated, how many errors there were, right? So out of those total features of 85, 86% of them are actually looking really good. So as we kind of round this out, we saw the issues that were found. We were able to make corrections and even get this nice report on the quality of our data. Oh, yes, and it looks like we've shared the resource. So for that accuracy report sample, that Python script and the defined tool in the toolbox is available for download from the community.esri.com site on that blog post. I think we do have time to extend just a little bit, I heard. So any further questions related to this whole QC cycle that we've gone through and seen some of these automated and visual review tools?
All right, while we're looking for the questions, let's go ahead and wrap up here. So in today's workshop, we covered, we spent some time defining data quality, what it was, and different ways of breaking it down based on the ISO standard. We talked about a lot of capabilities in ArcGIS to help you maintain and improve data quality. And we spent most of the time talking about Data Reviewer's capability for automating the review of data using configurable checks, and then workflows for managing workflows that involve people and visually reviewing data. Then we talked a little bit about errors, where they live, how they're managed, and how you can leverage them in reports that kind of help folks understand how good or bad their data is. So if you want to learn more about Data Reviewer, we, like everything, we have a product page. You can go ahead and review the product page. We have lots of customer cases there. We have a resources page that has links to other resources to help get up and running. In terms of resources, we also have this resources page has links to our blog, has a link to actually to our Learn ArcGIS lesson that you can get started and take a look at the capabilities, as well as what's new and all those fun things. Learn ArcGIS is a new learning path that you can use to kind of get up and running with Data Reviewer, as well as the Esri Academy. There's a learning plan there for folks who want to do a deeper dive on Data Reviewer's series of web course and some other resources to help get you going. If you have any questions or you want to talk about, or have questions about Data Reviewer, you can also visit us in the Esri community. There's a Data Reviewer place where you can post questions to other users. You can also find our product, our roadmap. So if you want to know what's coming in future releases, you can take a look at the roadmap there as well, and get a sense of where things are going with the tools. Alrighty, great. Thank you so much for attending today.
Everybody go make it a great day. Tell a friend about Esri's Data Reviewer, as well as Directions Magazine. Thanks, everybody.